Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And also welcome to our all-English lecture for the month of November 2021. And it's our News Watch unit. We've got a couple of news stories to talk about with you today. What are they about, Stephanie?
The first one's about some fish and how light pollution is hurting these young clownfish. I wonder who got money to study clownfish and their reaction to light pollution. It's a pretty funny scientist, I must say. So we are going to look at light pollution. Light pollution just means a lot of light. You know, actually, Taipei is similar. When you live in a big city, I was going to say like New York, but Taipei is a big city too. Sometimes you feel like you never really get a lot of darkness. You can sleep well. So that's light pollution when there's too much light. Noise pollution, too much noise. Air pollution, too much dirt and dust and toxins in the air. That's not good. But this is a study that's based on how clownfish react to light pollution. What's the second story, Tom?
The second story is about the Olympic Games and how the folks in Tokyo tried to make them greener Olympic Games to try to make them more environmentally friendly and stuff like that. Of course, they've finished. They're long over with, but we can still talk about those games, and they might have an effect on how the Olympics are conducted in the future. So let's get to it, everybody. Let's read the entire content of our lesson for today, and then we'll be right back to discuss it.
Study finds light pollution causes harm to young clownfish. A new study by an international team of scientists has revealed worrying news about the popular orange and white clownfish. Researchers studied the growth and survival of juvenile clownfish off the island of Moorea in French Polynesia. For 2 years, they observed how artificial light at night affected clownfish living close to shore, compared to those exposed only to natural cycles of daylight and darkness. The scientists found that the mortality rate among the clownfish subjected to nighttime artificial light was a startling 36% higher. Even the fish that did survive showed noticeably less growth than those experiencing only natural light cycles. Clownfish aren't the only reef fish being affected by this problem. The research team worries that light pollution could be negatively impacting around 20% of shore reef fish populations from many different species. They hope their study can raise the alarm about light pollution, which many people may not have considered a true environmental threat. The researchers are calling on policymakers to save offshore marine species.
Striving for a greener Olympic Games in Tokyo. Like other Olympic Games before them, the preparations for the Tokyo Olympic Games took colossal quantities of resources and work. But while this is far from environmentally beneficial, organizers employed strategies to reduce the amount of carbon and waste being produced by the games themselves. For one thing, they reduced energy usage in other parts of the country in order to offset the carbon produced by running the games. For another, the Olympic Committee worked to adhere to the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, particularly focusing on renewable energy, resource management, natural environments, fair labor practices, and open cooperation. Some concrete examples of how this was done can be seen in the game's sustainably sourced items. Podiums were made from donated recycled plastic, with metals being similarly sourced from recycled electronics. The extra electricity required to run the games also came from 100% renewable energy. While the Olympics still have a long way to go to be truly eco-friendly, environmental groups say this is a good first step.
Now remember, today's our all-English lecture. There is no Chinese teacher that we can depend on or, wait to hear a little later. No, it's just us. So we're going to try to speak a little bit more slowly, clearly, and hopefully you'll do really well listening. And if you don't know some of the words, of course, it gives you a chance to look them up. Now, we're talking today about two different news stories. The first one is about some clownfish and the light pollution that is hurting them. We call the titles of newspaper stories headlines. And sometimes they'll be missing some important words you would think need to be there for a complete sentence. It's because headlines are very rarely, if ever, a complete sentence. So that's why you might find them a little weird at first if you're not used to it. So here's a research study that finds light pollution causes harm to young clownfish. Clownfish are so pretty. If you don't know what they look like, get online, look one up. It almost looks like they're dressed up to go to the circus or something for me. They're very, very colorful. And I mentioned what light pollution was at the beginning. It's just too much light coming from people's homes and businesses and streets so that you never get that darkness that you need to really get some good rest.
Right. When I see the term light pollution, I think of it in terms of trying to do stargazing, like if you're in Taipei or Taichung and you want to look for the Triangulum galaxy, for example. Well, you're just not going to be able to see it because there's too much light pollution. You need to go to the mountains, like you need to go to Nantou or places like that where there is less light pollution. But this is a different problem with light pollution. There's a lot of light, maybe in harbors and along the coasts of the ocean, and that light gets into the ocean and causes problems for fish there. It causes harm to young clownfish, which are cute, as you said, but I'm sure they're also a member of the food chain, and if they kind of start dying off, that will affect the food chain and probably make our seafood dinners go up in price. But in any case, here's the first paragraph. It says, a new study by an international team of scientists has revealed worrying news about the popular orange and white clownfish. Okay, they had problems with clownfish before because when that movie came out a long time ago, Finding Nemo, lots of kids saw that movie and they said, Mommy, Daddy, I want a pet clownfish too. So, of course, lots of pet stores started selling clownfish, and that affected the population of clownfish in the oceans. So that was one problem. But now we've got another problem. All this light is causing problems for clownfish.
I forgot about Finding Nemo. That was fun. Okay, so researchers studied the growth and survival of juvenile clownfish off the island of Maria in French Polynesia. There are lots of different islands around that area in French Polynesia. Now, juvenile is one of our vocabulary words. It just means it relates to the youth of the world, the young people in the world, juvenile. We'll often see it used when we're reading or listening to news stories about crime, and some young kids have committed a crime, and they might be placed in juvenile detention or juvenile prison. But you can also pronounce this word, guys, juvenile. For the most part in America, people pronounce it juvenile. I think the Brits say juvenile, but both pronunciations are correct, so pick the one you like the best.
And you most often see this word with the word delinquent. If you're a juvenile delinquent, that means you're a bad teenager, you're causing trouble. You might have to go to a special school and be sent away and stuff like that.
Like juvenile detention that I mentioned. Yeah.
Exactly. They would call that person a juvenile delinquent.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, we're talking about young clownfish. They're not quite adults yet. And we're talking about their growth and their survival. And this, again, is off an island in French Polynesia. And for 2 years, they observed how artificial light at night affected clownfish living close to shore. compared to those exposed only to natural cycles of daylight and darkness. So they had two studies here. They were studying fish that were not exposed to artificial light at night, and they were comparing those to fish that were exposed to artificial light at night. Again, light coming from the shore, from the harbor, and stuff like that. Some of those ports have really bright lights.
So artificial light might include some lamps, some bright lights that the boats have. You know, if they're by the shore, there are probably some boats and ships nearby too. There are a lot of lights that happen. Those never go out. A lot of times, even in the middle of the night, if you're in a big city, it can still be quite bright. I know when I was in New York, I bought special curtains that blocked the light. They were black because I wanted to sleep better. If you have a light room where you are currently, guys, that can help you get a better night's sleep is to buy some light blocking curtains. And they're not that expensive, and they're so worth it. Well, these poor clownfish had a lot of that artificial or man-made light. It wasn't natural coming from our planet Earth. Artificial light was affecting these poor young clownfish living close to the shore. And so it was kind of hard for them to get a good night's rest. We know that if we don't get enough sleep and we don't have enough nutrition, we don't grow very well. So it applies to animals and fish just like it does to humans.
Indeed. So the scientists found that the mortality rate among the clownfish subjected to nighttime artificial light was a startling 36% higher. So mortality refers to death. Dying. So the mortality rate just refers to the percentage of living things that die as the result of something. So the mortality rate of clownfish that were subjected to that light at night, the rate was 36% higher than normal. So that could tell us that, yes, the light is having an effect on those fish. And even the fish that did survive showed noticeably less growth than those experiencing only natural light cycles. So even some of the fish survived, but they showed noticeably less growth. They had less growth, but it was so much less that it was noticeable that people could actually see it. These fish are smaller than they're supposed to be.
Oh, yeah. So moving on to paragraph 2, it says here that clownfish aren't the only reef fish being affected by this problem. Reef, as you know, is that ridge of rock. It's usually made up of coral. It's not smooth. It's very jagged and rough. You can sometimes see it just above the surface of the sea. It's a fun place to go scuba diving or just looking down at all the beautiful fish and marine life that are around there. So they aren't the only reef fish, telling us that's where clownfish live, is by the reef. The research team worries that light pollution could be negatively impacting or influencing around 20% of shore reef fish populations from many different species. So it's actually affecting more than just the clownfish. There are these different fish populations from different species that are also being impacted or affected by the light.
Not all of them, but still 20% is a lot, and they hope their study can raise the alarm about light pollution, which many people may not have considered a true environmental threat. Kind of like you at the beginning of the program. Why are they studying this?
Yeah.
This is stupid, it's dumb, but maybe it does have an effect on the environment, and like I said, maybe somehow it will affect the price of seafood, who knows? So the researchers are calling on policymakers to save offshore marine species. So to call on someone means that you're hoping that they'll do this. You're sending them a message and saying, hey, why don't you guys do something about this? Do something about these marine species, these living creatures in the sea that are offshore, that are living off the island in the great depths of the sea. And yes, we want to keep them living so we can attract tourists and stuff like that.
And of course, marine, which is another vocabulary word for us, just means it's found or produced by the sea or in the sea. It's found in the sea, marine life, marine animals. If you see marine animals, you know they're talking about a lot of fish. But here, yeah, hopefully people will listen to these researchers who have discovered this new fact. So we're going to not listen to our Chinese teacher right now, but we're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with, I guess, headline number 2, story number 2. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everybody. Let's continue now with the second news story that we're going to talk about today. We just got done talking about the poor clownfish. Now let's talk about the Olympic Games in Tokyo. And the Japanese are always trying to be progressive, and they're trying to make things nice and clean and efficient. So the Olympics that took place in Tokyo were no exception. They were striving for a greener Olympic Games there. They wanted them to be more environmentally friendly, to not cause so much pollution, and to get their energy from renewable sources. So let's begin the story by looking at the first paragraph here. It says, like other Olympic Games before them, the preparations for the Tokyo Olympic Games took colossal quantities of resources and work. So if you have the Olympic Games, you're going to need lots of resources, and lots of people are going to have to be working to make them happen. They need to build stadiums, they need to manufacture tickets and collect tickets and manage people and stuff like that. So yes, it required, or the games required, large quantities, huge quantities, colossal quantities. So that's what colossal means, just a lot of something, a great amount of something.
Yeah, I like to think of the Colosseum. In Italy, when I see that word, it reminds me of its meaning. The Colosseum is huge. So this word is another synonym for huge quantities, colossal quantities. It's fun to use different adjectives to mix up your English, so it's not the same again and again. Try to insert some new vocabulary words if you can. But it says, but while this is far from environmentally beneficial, organizers employed strategies to reduce the amount of carbon and waste being produced by the games themselves. You can imagine with all those people preparing for the games and those that attend, whether they're the athletes or the judges or the people who are in charge of everything, there are a lot of people there. So it increases the amount of carbon, of course, that's used. And waste is just another word for trash and garbage. And we don't like that around. If you've been to Japan, and I think a lot of our listeners have, it's a popular place to go for the Taiwanese if they go on vacation, you'll notice that they are very, very picky about how clean their country is, which I kind of enjoy. I think it's very nice and clean everywhere you look. So, yeah, if they were hosting the games, they probably were prepared for an increase in carbon and trash or waste.
Now, here it says, but while this is far from environmentally beneficial, organizers employed strategies to reduce the amount of carbon and waste being produced by the games themselves. So while this, it is true that it's not environmentally beneficial. If you have the Olympics, you're going to be causing pollution. It's just going to cause problems. But what you can do is try to reduce the amount of waste you produce. So they tried really hard to reduce or cut back on the amount of carbon and waste being produced. They still produced it, yes, but they produced less of it.
That's good, right? For one thing, this is one technique or method they used, is they reduced energy usage in other parts of the country in order to offset the carbon produced by running the games. So maybe you were in, a faraway part of Japan, and you couldn't use the energy you had before because the government was using most of the energy and directing it to the games so that it was offset. So if you were trying to balance things, you need each side to be a similar weight, right? Well, if one side is too heavy, it means you have to counterbalance that. You have to put something else on the other side so the balance evens out. So to offset something just means you do something that increases or decreases something that balances the effect of something. So, yeah, if you're using a lot of carbon, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, you don't use so much energy and you cut back your carbon footprint. Or maybe today you're producing a lot of trash. I don't know what you're doing, but tomorrow you make sure and produce very little trash that will offset the trash you used the day before.
Or I've heard it suggested that we should have a big nuclear war to offset global warming, because if you have a big nuclear war, then you have a nuclear winter afterwards.
Let's not do that.
Let's not do that, but then the temperatures will get really cold, and then those cold temperatures will offset the warmer temperatures from global warming, and we should have normal temperatures.
I'd rather have global warming than be dead.
The only problem is that most people will be dead because of a nuclear war. But in any case, that's just an example of the term to offset. So maybe in some parts of Japan they said, well, you can't run your air conditioner all day long. Maybe you need to turn it off for a couple of hours every day, or don't drive your car to work, ride your bicycle or something like that, in order to offset the amount of energy being used at the Olympic Games. And, Japan is a very social society. They all pitch in, and they're all about cooperating with each other for the common good. So I'm sure they were quite successful with that.
So here's another thing they did. Remember, our author used the phrase for one thing. So usually when you use that phrase for one thing, you're looking for another, and for another in a sentence that follows that. So let's see what our author used here. Our author used for another. That's a great way to start the next sentence. So for another, what was another method they used? Well, the Olympic Committee worked to adhere to the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. If you adhere to something, you stick to it. You try to remain with it. You follow something. Maybe you're adhering to your Buddhist practices, so you follow those practices. And what they tried to do was they focused on keeping to or sticking to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Particularly, here's one of the goals, focusing on renewable energy, using more renewable energy like wind and solar and power and ocean. What would that be? Water power. And also resource management. Just making sure you know how much you're using of one thing or another. Natural environments, to keep those as natural as possible. Fair labor practices, pay people what they deserve to be paid. And open cooperation. As Tom said, the Japanese people in particular are very willing to cooperate and try to help each other out. And if their government says to do something, they try to go ahead and do that thing. So cooperation means you are getting along or doing something to make a task more easily done, more easily put together. So it's a process of just working together with other people for the same goal or to accomplish a goal together.
Exactly. So they do have 17 sustainable development goals, but these are the ones they want to focus on. Again, renewable energy, resource management, natural environments, fair labor practices, and open cooperation. And that's the noun. To cooperate is the verb. Let's cooperate. Let's work together on this. Now, in the next paragraph here, it says, some concrete examples of how this was done can be seen in the game's sustainably sourced items. If you talk about concrete, you're not talking about building materials that use cement and gravel and water all mixed together to make buildings and stuff like that. If something's concrete, it's something that you can actually see and hold in your hand. It's not a theory. It's not just an idea. So these are concrete examples of what they actually did. They actually used these sustainably sourced items, which means they were environmentally friendly.
Right. Podiums were made from donated recycled plastic. That's where they got their podiums from. Now, if you're talking about a podium at church or maybe a business meeting, it's just that that area where someone stands behind it with a microphone and gives some sort of speech. But if you're talking about the Olympic Games, the podiums are those blocks that the winners stand on. The gold medal, the silver medal, and the bronze medal winners, they all stand on those podiums and are honored at that point after they compete and they've won. So those are the podiums. They were made from donated recycled plastic. If you donate something, you sometimes give money for a good cause, or sometimes you can actually donate other things, maybe some products that you don't need anymore. Maybe you've donated some clothes to a charity before. So these podiums were were made from donated recycled plastic, which is really smart.
And, of course, here in Taiwan, we've got lots of plastic from all those bottles that everybody drinks their tea in. So they could do that here when Taiwan has the next athletic competition. When it takes place here, they can take a lesson from Japan there. And then we've got the medals, with a D there, medals, gold, silver, and bronze. They were actually made or sourced from recycled electronics. I'd heard about that. We've got all these old cell phones that we don't use anymore, but there are tiny little bits of these different kinds of metals in those electronic items, again, like old cell phones or old computers and stuff like that. So they took all those things out and made them into the medals that the athletes were awarded with.
You're probably thinking, you mean there's gold in some of my electronics? No, they probably had to put the gold on the very outside. I'm sure the inside of a gold medal is not pure gold. It probably has silver or bronze or some other cheaper,
lead, maybe.
Yeah, lead, steel.
To make it heavy,
Some other heavy metal. So, yeah, these were sourced from recycled electronics. Electronics can be lots of different things. It can be your computer, your cell phones. What else do we have? We have lots of electronics these days. Just games that you play. If you play video games, those are electronics. The extra electricity required to run the games also came from 100% renewable energy, which is pretty impressive. So renewable, again, is solar power, wind energy, energy from the ocean, water energy. So these were all renewable sources of energy that were used to produce their electricity, which I'm sure they needed a lot of electricity. While the Olympics still have a long way to go to be truly eco-friendly, environmental groups say this is a good first step. I think just by being aware of it and trying to do your best, I think you've already accomplished a great deal.
It's a good start. Of course, it wasn't 100% carbon-free. They still produced lots of pollution and things like that, but less than Olympic Games that took place in the past. So they're doing a good job there. I wonder how Brazil did back in 2016 with that. They may not have been so eco-friendly there, but leave it to the Japanese to set a good example for the rest of us. And in the future, hopefully other host cities or host nations will learn a thing or two from the Japanese and make the Olympic Games less polluting, okay, more eco-friendly. They'll use renewable sources of energy and things like that and make those podiums out of recycled plastic, and they'll continue to make those medals out of recycled electronics.
Yeah, we've got a lot of that wasteful electronic materials just hanging out around the globe, as we know. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. That was our all-English lecture. We hope you learned a lot, and we hope you understood pretty much all of it. If you didn't, just keep listening. It gets better and better as you practice. For English Digest, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tom. Goodbye.
See ya.